So every young researcher dreams of a big scientific breakthrough, right? A cure, a discovery, something. I did too. I was a young researcher, 25, working towards my PhD. And there I was one day with a scalpel in my hand, standing over a pregnant rat that I had to kill and dissect. Not just one, but many. And I found myself all dizzy with unease and just one thought repeating in my head. If science was about saving lives, why was I starting my career by ending one? That moment was my first breakthrough, a fracture, a fault line, just at the start of my scientific journey. I simply couldn't shake it off as a moment of discomfort in the lab, a momentary discomfort. And so I started to question, I started looking deeper. And what I found was that animal experimentation wasn't just an ethical problem. It was a scientific one too. Now, let me ask the medical students and doctors here. If your ECG machine gave false readings 19 out of 20 times, would you still use it? Of course not, right? But in medicine, we've accepted experimenting on animals, that's a century-old practice, as the gold standard. We've relied on rats, rabbits, monkeys, and dogs to develop cures and treatments, assuming that they are miniature humans. But here is the uncomfortable truth. 95% of drugs that pass animal tests and are found to be safe and effective in animals, they fail in human clinical trials. Yes, 95%. HIV, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's, miracle cures in mice, endless failures in humans. That's over a failure rate of 99% in all of these disease areas. So there I was, drowning in all of these statistics when it hit me. I had a bigger problem than my PhD thesis deadline. I was really stuck in a scientific identity crisis. Now, we were always told that experimenting on animals had shaped medical discoveries for centuries, right? But the reality, they fail more often than they work. Sure, they have been a part of some discoveries, but that doesn't mean that the discoveries depended on them. In fact, history is full of examples where there were drugs that seemed perfectly safe in animals, but they had harmful effects in humans. And the reverse is also true. Drugs that save millions of people today would have been thrown out of the window if we had just trusted animal data alone. Penicillin, the antibiotic that changed the course of medicine, that's lethal to guinea pigs. Aspirin, our go-to painkiller, it's toxic to dogs. What was equally concerning to me was the scale of animal use. Over 100 million animals, including mice, rats, rabbits, cats, dogs, monkeys, birds, and fishes, being used globally in laboratories every year. Many of them, they endure painful procedures. They may have harsh chemicals rubbed into their eyes, onto their skin. They may be forced to breathe in toxic chemicals, infected with diseases they would never naturally get before being killed. And when they are not on the laboratory bench, they spend their entire lives in cages, limited in space and interaction, often seen as disposable laboratory equipments rather than living, sentient beings. Now, novel drugs can take almost 10 to 15 years and thousands of crores to develop, to come into the market. And for centuries, we've been pouring in time, money, and animal lives into experiments that just don't deliver. And to be honest, deep down, the scientific community has known that we humans, we are not 70 kg rats. Our metabolism, our physiology is fundamentally different from animals. They do not respond to diseases and drugs the way we do. And as I kept digging deeper, I was really excited to discover this parallel universe that had started emerging in the last few decades, which did not depend on rats, rabbits, dogs, and monkeys. Scientists had started developing and using human-relevant, non-animal methods that were faster, smarter, and more predictive of human biology. We're talking about computational models that can predict a drug's behavior and flag toxicity faster than any animal study. We have 3D reconstructed tissue models that can actually mimic the human skin, the human cornea, the human lungs, and really tiny devices called organs on a chip, where human cells, they breathe, beat, and pump, just like the real thing. You link a few of these together, a liver, a kidney, a brain, a heart, and what you get is a human on a chip. These methods, they replicate human physiology, diseases, and drug responses with far greater accuracy than experiments on animals could ever do. So I was so excited to discover this parallel universe, I really started asking bigger questions. It wasn't that the scientists weren't trying to come up with solutions. They absolutely were. The problem was that the system was stuck in the past. We were clinging on to a century-old practice, defending it, trying to patch it up, instead of embracing the advanced methods right in front of us. Why? Because of tradition. Because comfort often feels safer than change. Now, there's a super interesting theory by this famous historian and philosopher Thomas Kuhn, who says that science, it never moves smoothly. It stumbles. How many Netflix fans do we have here? Please raise your hands. Perfect. So let me explain this with a Netflix analogy, all right? We've all been there when we excitedly start with a new series, and we binge on it, episode after episode. That's normal science. You inject a rat, you record a response, you publish paper, repeat. Then all of a sudden, the plot, it stops making sense. It feels like a drag, right? But you still keep watching it. That's crisis. Evidence is piling up. The science keeps failing. HIV, Alzheimer's, stroke, cancer. Endless cures in mice, endless failures in humans. But you still won't let go. And finally, you rage quit and you start with a new series altogether. That is revolution. Right now, medicine is stuck rewatching the same series again and again, animal experimentation. And Thomas Kuhn was right. The only way out of this crisis is a revolution, a shift, a paradigm change. And little did I know at that time that soon I would be helping drive this revolution in the country. Now, finishing a PhD doesn't magically hand you a life plan, right? In fact, I found myself in that classic post-PhD fog, where I literally knew everything about one gene, but nothing about what I wanted to do with my life. I soon landed a research post in AIIMS, New Delhi, where I was supposed to work on Parkinson's and human-induced pluripotent stem cells. A very meaningful project, absolutely no animals involved. But still, I felt I wanted to do something different. I was meant to do something different. And that's when fate, or I would say Google, intervened, and I stumbled across a job listing with science, ethics, and policy all rolled into one. And I thought, wait, this is me. It literally read like somebody had hacked my Google search history and turned it into a job description for me. My current stage, it's no longer a laboratory bench. My tools aren't pipettes, reagents, and microscope. Instead, evidence, persistence, and scientific dialogue. For the last 6.5 years, I've been working within a system that's driving real change in how science is being done in the country. I've been closely collaborating with a lot of government regulators, policymakers, funding agencies, scientists, educators, industry, companies, non-profits to push India's science into the 21st century. I'm out there, educating, influencing, shaping policies, supporting R&D innovation, and ensuring that India's science isn't just modern, but it's also humane. And slowly and steadily, India has started taking steps in the right direction towards this new era in science. For example, animal testing is now prohibited for cosmetics and household products in favor of more sophisticated, human-relevant technologies. Dissections in classrooms have now been replaced with modern tools. And undergraduate medical, pharmacy, and dental students, they are now being trained with simulations and softwares. These human-relevant, non-animal methods, they are now written out in regulatory frameworks and guidelines for testing of vaccines, drugs, pesticides, and chemicals. And our Indian scientists, they're already creating 3D organoids, 4D bioprinted tissues that's delivering better science while reducing animal use. We've clearly started taking steps in the right direction. What we really need now are strong and bold initiatives. First, we must recognize that these new methods, they aren't science fiction anymore. They're right here. They're shaping policies. They're being used internationally. And therefore, harmonizing their acceptance globally is ensuring that they are used to the maximum limit while reducing reliance on animals. Instead of trying to improve animal models, we really need to end their use in areas where they have consistently shown to fail, and systematically phase out animal use in areas where they are slowing down progress. At the bare minimum, we need to demand that every experiment on animal, it passes through a strict harm-benefit analysis system, just like it's done for humans. It's time that we also redirect our energy, our talent, our resources, and money into technologies that deliver, that's human-relevant science. And equally important is that we equip our current generation and future generations to use these new methods. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us one thing, it's this: we cannot afford slow, outdated science. By cutting out time-consuming and resource-intensive animal tests and turning towards human-relevant models, computational methods, artificial intelligence, we were able to develop vaccines in record time, that's 1 year, as opposed to 12 to 15 years that it takes to bring a new drug or a vaccine into the market, just 1 year. Human-relevant science, it doesn't just replace animals, it outperforms them, which enables us to bring in, to respond to global emergencies at the speed that patients really need. The lesson is quite clear today. To prepare for the next pandemic or any 21st century challenge, we need 21st century science that's built on human biology and not on the animals. Even the regulators worldwide, they've got this wake-up call. From the US to the Europe, frameworks are shifting away from animal tests and fast-tracking development and use of non-animal methods. For example, the US FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they now officially embrace non-animal data for drugs. Europe has committed to phase out use of animals in research, toxicity testing, and medical education, and education in general. And what about India? We have the new drugs and clinical trial rules of 2019 that now gives researchers the green light to use 3D organoids, organs on a chip, and computational models to bring in new drugs into the market. The goal has to be clear today: faster cures, smarter use of time and money, compassion for animals, and a science that truly, truly advances. Now, I know that animal experimentation has been like a habit that's been passed down from generation to generation, and this entire transition, it sounds easier said than done, right? But let's be honest. Science isn't just about discovering new cures and exploring new frontiers. It's also about responsibility. to protect patients with the best toolbox that we have. It's about vision, to see beyond outdated practices. And most importantly, it's about courage, to challenge long-standing norms even when they've been defended for over a century. We really need to stop glorifying the contributions of animals in science and instead focus on the statistics. Think of all the time and money we wasted in developing drugs that worked in rats but did not work in humans. And all the drugs that we shelved because they did not work in rats but could have worked in humans. I simply cannot think of another place where a 95% failure rate is acceptable. The question today isn't whether we have a choice. We absolutely do. The question is whether we have the courage to abandon outdated scientific practices and break old habits. My first fracture shaped me. I made a choice. From doing experiments to ensuring that the right experiments are done, to chasing cures, to changing systems that allow for these cures to be found faster. And trust me, changing systems can be very hard. And that's where advocacy can be as powerful as discovery. Because when you change a policy, you don't just change a lab, you modernize the entire direction of science. To all the medical students out here today, I've shared my story to remind you that your degree isn't just a certificate. It's a launchpad for purpose, for innovation, for meaningful change. So start questioning, challenge norms, push boundaries, think out of the box. You aren't just medical students. As the future clinicians, researchers, regulators and policymakers of this country, you are the generation that decides whether we keep wasting decades and billions over outdated scientific methods or whether we build a science that truly and truly works for humans. And I really hope that one day when your grandchildren ask you, wait, you tested medicines on animals? You should be able to smile and say, yes, but we ended it. We were the last generation to do it. Thank you so much.